What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Welcome to another video. Let's get right into today's clip that we're going to be watching of Dave Ruben sit down with Larry Elder. And this clip is very important and special to him because this is when he admittedly said that he was flipped over from being a liberal to a conservative. And this was when he basically said that he made up his mind and finally, saw the truth, the light. Somebody said this is when Morpheus sat down with Neo. So let's watch this clip together, and then of course I'm gonna kind of give my input as we get along. Let's get into it.
Not acknowledge that there are some systemic issues.
Give me an example. Tell me what you think the most systemic racist issue is. What is it?
Well, I would say that because black people in most cases, in many cases, were descendants of slaves, that racism as an institution, that it just, a certain amount of it just exists.
2015? Give me the most blatant racist example you can come up with right now.
I think you could probably find evidence that, in general, cops are more willing to shoot if the perpetrator is black.
What's your data
than white.
What's your basis for saying that? Last year.
Well, look, I know a lot of people.
Now this is crazy because I'm gonna try not to stop a lot on this video so we can watch it all the way through. But I wanted to say something right here because this was because I used to be liberal or quote unquote vote. I used to vote on the left in the past, and this was the same argument that I used to make as well, and that every liberal makes and uses this argument as their go-to when being asked what is the number one, or give me an example of systemic racism. And I find this to be fascinating because it points out that it's an answer that is almost brainwashed into you. Because if this is the answer that everybody gives, this is the answer that I used to give, and it's also inaccurate, that means it comes from being brainwashed or taught wrong or indoctrinated. And I can admit that because that was literally the argument that I used to make all the time. And even, I have some police officers that I'm friends with, and I used to have this argument with them all the time too. I was like, man, you're part of a systemically racist organization. And I used to feel like I was calling them out. I was doing my my part in being a social justice warrior. But I realized when I started doing my own research, started investigating the numbers for myself, started looking at the the UCR and the FBI data and things like that. And I know these things because I used to be, before I got into the science in college, I was a criminal justice major. I wanted to be a police officer my whole life. I was in law enforcement programs in high school. I did what people will call the Explorer program kind of thing, where I went and interned at the sheriff's department in Dallas County. I worked with the detectives. I worked on the traffic squad, in the jails. Like I said, this was what I wanted to do. I wanted to be either a homicide detective or like a FBI agent or some type of federal agent. So I know where to get these data from. I know where to get the information from. And even knowing all these things, I was still wrong. I was absolutely wrong. And so that's how I was wrong because I was brainwashed, indoctrinated by the liberal media, by CNN. Social media, it was all in our face. The Freddie Grays and the Fernando Castillos, I think that's his name, the guy that had the cigarettes, and George Floyd, and they were all in our face all day, every day. So it was like, damn, is this really happening? And when you're not quote unquote intellectually mature, you just believe what anybody tell you without going and do further research of your own. So that's how I know this answer that everybody gives is an answer that stems from being brainwashed, because I was that individual myself. So, but let's keep going.
People would say, look what's going on in Chicago.
I know what they would say.
Yeah.
I'm talking about what the facts are. 965 people were shot by cops last year and killed. 4% of them were white cops shooting unarmed blacks. In Chicago in 2011, 21 people were shot and killed by cops. In 2015, there were 7. In Chicago, which is a third black, a third white, and a third Hispanic, 70% of the homicides are black on black. About 40 per month, almost 500 per year last year in Chicago, and 75% of them are unsolved. Where is the Black Lives Matter on that? The idea that a racist white cop shooting unarmed black people is a peril to black people is BS. It's complete and total BS. And the reason for these so-called activists saying this is the assumption that racism remains a major problem in America. The media, CNN, especially MSNBC, runs down whenever a black cop shoots somebody, and it's some march on Washington. It's ridiculous. Black people, half the homicides in this country are committed by and against black people. Last year there were 14,000 homicides, not talking about suicides, I'm talking about homicides. Half of them were black, 96% of them black on black of that 7,000. Where's the Black Lives Matter people on that?
So there's where you would say that this is purely because of social justice. This is purely because they want ultimately for people to be angry enough to just keep voting Democrat.
That's right.
Exactly.
And where's the evidence of the lack of social justice? When a black suspect is killed by a cop, believe me, the media is on it. People are watching it, and justice will, for the most part, occur. In Baltimore, where Freddie Gray was killed, Freddie Gray died in a van. I shouldn't say was killed. Died in a van.
Yeah.
You have a city that's 45% black. City council is 100% Democrat. The majority of city council is black. The top cop at the time was black. The number 2 cop was black. The majority of the command staff is black. The mayor is black. The AG is black. And yet here we are talking about racism. I mean, it's absurd.
It's absurd. And that's also a great example of the systemic racism not being prevalent in the black communities. Because if you look at Dallas, where I'm at, the mayor is black, the police chief is black, the whole city is ran by black people. Same thing in Memphis, St. Louis, Chicago, Baltimore, all DC, mayor is black, police chief is black. All these cities where quote unquote black folks are being killed by white cops are the same cities that are being ran by black people. So if quote unquote the justice is not being served, the mayors and the DAs and the police chiefs are the ones not bringing them to justice because they're the ones that are in charge. And then if it is a majority black community, that means the jury is most likely going to be majority black. So the jury is also not holding. You see how you have to get below the surface level? You have to start investigating and doing these research on your own. Because if you just go off of the headlines, go off of what the media says, off CNN and MSNBC says, without getting into the nitty gritty, because they love to deceive you and use euphemisms to get their messages across, then you're gonna be wrong. And that's why you have to go read these things for yourself.
Absurd.
So it's funny, I find myself caught in between this a little bit as a liberal where I want to always try to defend the other. So in this case...
Now, if you don't know who Dave Ruben is, he is an ultra conservative now. Now he is to a point where people call him a white supremacist, MAGA Republican. And yeah, he went from being a liberal. Now, he switched sides after doing his own research. But now that he doesn't agree with the left, he's quote unquote a white supremacist.
The other being black people, I'm always sympathetic to that. And that, at the same time, I hear you laying out a pretty solid case.
These are just the facts. I'll tell you something else, too. There was just a study, University of Washington, and it turns out cops were more reluctant, more hesitant to pull the trigger against a black suspect than a white suspect. Probably because of the fear of being accused of racially profiling and the fear that the civil rights establishment was going to come down on them. So if anything, whites are more likely to be shot by a cop under certain circumstances than a black person. And in the last 30 or 40 years, the percentage of suspects killed by cops who are black has declined 75%. However, the percentage of whites killed by cops has flatlined.
Yeah.
And so, if anything, people are more concerned about shooting black people for fear that they're going to be called racist. And almost every one of these incidents, whether it's Eric Gardner in New York, who died because he was selling Lucy's and resisted arrest, whether it's Tamir Rice in Cleveland, who was twirling around the gun, whether it's Michael Brown in Ferguson, who had just committed a strong arm robbery, almost every one of these incidents involved somebody resisting arrest.
Facts.
Why don't you just do what the police tell you? My dad said, when I get pulled over, have my hand at 10 o'clock, have my hand at 2 o'clock, say yes, sir, say no, sir, make sure my paperwork is in order, and if
I hate to pause as much as I am, but this is just so good. I don't know what you guys, I don't know if you guys realize what he said. My dad taught me. See, that's where modern society is lacking. These kids have no fathers in the household. They have no fatherhood mentorship from anybody, let alone a father. They don't respect their elders. And anytime that I watch somebody that's conservative or been a conservative majority of their life, most of the time they had their dads growing up. See, conservative values are usually taught, from one generation to the next, unless you were like me and you kind of got hoodwinkled. But having a father is 100% the difference maker. And I just wanted to point that out because, like he said, his dad taught him to have to cooperate basically and be respectful. And that's what I was taught. Respect your teachers, respect your parents, respect your elders, respect the law. And the law is the police. Even if you disagree, you can always fight it later in the court. Get the badge number, get the name, get the department, and go file a complaint. But being disrespectful, aggressive, fighting the cops, that's not gonna lead you in the right path. I mean, I don't understand how people can't comprehend that part. At least don't fight. Don't be aggressive. Don't resist. Don't shoot at cops. I mean, that little message right there alone can save a lot of y'all's lives.
I feel the cop is mistreating me, get a badge number and deal with it later on. If Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton and Obama and the whole group of them told black people to do that, we'd have a lot fewer of these things to deal with in the first place.
Yeah. All right. So I'm with you. I'm hearing a lot of what you're saying here. So as a black conservative then, who now you've laid out your case there.
But you haven't laid out yours. I asked you to name the most important example of racism, and you gave white cops going after black people. And I told you, gave you the facts for that, so that's nonsense. So you must have something else. What else is it? If you think racism remains a problem in America, give it to me.
Well, I think it remains a problem.
Give it to me. Give it to me.
It may not be systemic in that it's not like you're not being hired because you're black. There's no systemic reason, legal reason that exists, that kind of thing. But I think that racism as a general theory exists.
I need some specifics. You gave me the white cop thing. What else? Give me another example where you think is a problem.
Well, as a black conservative, tell me how do you get people
to
come around?
You're the one who made the assertion that you think racism remains a major problem in America.
And that's one of the liberal arguments. Well, you're saying racism doesn't exist, so you tell me how it doesn't exist. How can I prove to you that it doesn't exist? If there's no evidence of it existing, that's my evidence. That's my evidence that it does not exist. There's no other form of evidence to show you that it did not happen. That is the worst liberal argument that any of these people on the left make. Well, you're saying racism doesn't exist, then prove it. What? Well, okay, there's no evidence. If you say it exists, because for it to be prevalent, for it to occur, that means there has to be evidence. There has to be experiences. There has to be provable evidence that it happened for you to say it exists. That does not make any sense. It's like saying, well, there was a car accident down the street and you have to prove to me that it didn't happen. Okay, where's the car accident at? Where's the cars? Where's the glass that shattered? Where's it at? So if you're the one saying that it did happen, all you have to do is point out the glass, point out the vehicles, the damage. I mean, it's just so crazy how they use the argument.
America. I asked you to give me an example. You gave me white cops going after blacks. As
Which
far
you
as I'm
debunked.
concerned, you didn't hold it up very well. What's the other argument you have? What's the other thing?
Well, I don't know that it's systemic in the sort of macro sense.
I'm not
but
mad. I
yeah,
just want to know what it is you're talking
No,
about.
no, that's exactly what, believe me, that's 100% why I
we can
wanted
deal with
to
what is
have
it?
you
Blacks
here.
are not getting into school. BS. We have affirmative action. So a black person with an SAT and a GPA of X will get into a school faster and easier than a white person with an SAT or a GPA of X. And if going to school.
Facts, because I feel like I was an affirmative action student in my university, and I made a video about it on my a few weeks ago. But yeah, I mean that's one of my experiences as well. I've never experienced racism getting into school because I feel like I got into the school I got into when I really shouldn't have. But hey,
It's a route to the middle class. You can make an argument that blacks have an easier route to the middle class. If you're talking about about poverty, the poorer you are, the more accessible loans and grants are for you. The problem, the biggest burden that black people have, in my opinion, again, is the percentage of blacks, 75% of them, that are raised without fathers. And that has every other social negative consequence connected to it. Crime,
there you have it.
not being able to compete economically in the country,
There you have
being
it.
more likely to be arrested. That's the #1 problem facing the black community. And when I hear people tell me about systemic racism or unconscious racism, I always say, give me an example, and almost nobody can do it.
Facts.
So the family stuff. So I'll follow your logic there on the family stuff. What can actually be done about that then? I mean, because that's a big
reverse
lift.
the welfare state. In 1890, 1900, you look at census reports. A black kid, believe it or not, was slightly more likely to be born to a nuclear intact family than a white kid. Even during slavery, a black kid was more likely to be born under a roof with his biological mother and biological father than today. What's happened is we launched this so-called war on poverty in the 60s, where literally Lyndon Johnson sent people knocking on doors. I lived in the 60s, and people knocked on doors apprising women of their availability to welfare, provided there was no man in the house. And we went from 25% of blacks being born outside of wedlock in 65 to 75% right now. And you look at how much money that we spent on welfare, and the lines are parallel. It was a neutron bomb dropped on this country, not just on the black community, but on people in general. At one time, only about 5% of whites were born outside of wedlock. Now, 25% of whites are born outside of wedlock. I was in college in 1970, and there was a report called the Moynihan Report, The Negro Family, A Case for National Action. It's written by a liberal, by a man who became a Democratic senator from New York. And at the time, 25% of black kids were born outside of wedlock. He said, my God, this number is horrific. If we don't do something about it, it could get even higher. Well, fast forward, 25% of white kids are now born outside of wedlock. It is the #1 problem in this country, and what we've done, in my opinion, is we've economically incentivized women to marry the government, and we've allowed men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility. And now we have this.
There you have it. And that is the segment that Dave Ruben said that he was, he went from being a liberal to a conservative when finally actually listening to the other sides of the argument. And that's one of the problems with the left, is that most of the arguments that conservatives make, they've never heard before. See, most conservatives know exactly what the other side says. Their talking points, their arguments, their quote-unquote evidence. We know most of them, if not all of them, because we've heard of them 100 million times. Because that's what y'all use to justify pushing your ideology, your narrative, your policies. But whenever a liberal sits down with a conservative and they actually hear the evidence, the talking point, our ideas, it's like their mind is blown, especially the ones that are sane. And Larry Elder said the same thing about Dave when this interview started, was that if, he said this on another podcast, actually. He said that he knew that he would be able to switch Dave from being a liberal to a conservative if Dave was a rational, sane individual. And that's what Dave is. He's a sane, rational individual who can actually think critically and analyze evidence for himself. And so when he was finally presented with these evidence by Larry Elder, that's when he switched over from being a liberal to a conservative. And same thing that happened to me as well, is I was presented with evidence. I was open-minded. I listened to the other side of the argument, and I was able to decipher things for myself, read things for myself, and finally come to the conclusion that, hey, we're not victims. We're not oppressed. Racism is not as real as you think it is. My favorite quotes of all time is the supply of racism does not meet the demand, or the demand for racism does not meet the supply. Yeah, the demand for racism in America does not meet the supply. So there you have it, guys. I hope you enjoy the content. Let me know what you guys think. Like the video. Comment down below. Let's talk about it in the comments section. And if this is your first time on the channel, consider hitting the subscribe button for more content. See you on the next one. Peace.